Hey guys, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome back to the Wetlands, and welcome to the build that almost ended me. I don't know about you guys, but the crashing in Planet Zoo, in this zoo anyway, right now is like every 10 minutes, and it has made building this almost impossible. But somehow I got there, so we're going to take a look at it. So this is going to be a habitat for the platypus. I'm so excited to build this. These were one of the animals that I was really looking forward to making a habitat for as soon as they announced the wetland pack. And I came up with the idea of trying to make basically the smallest habitat I've ever built. I thought that would be really cool, just to have like a little pool for them. I did my research as always, and the platypus needs next to no space to be happy. They basically spend their entire lives either sleeping in a little burrow they've made in a riverbank, or swimming around in the river outside their burrow, eating anything that wiggles. And they basically don't use land. So they're either in their burrow, or unless you catch them in the sort of 5 seconds it takes them to scramble from their burrow into the water, they have no use for land. So I figured we could basically go ahead and make them a habitat with virtually no land in it, and make it all deep water for them to swim in. Originally there was going to be 2 of these with differing water heights, but as you will see, I've skipped all of the crashes out of the video. Obviously that doesn't really make for good viewing. But every time you hear a record scratch, that is my game crashing, and this happened so many times. I lost so much work because of this. So let's get on to the build, and that was a whole different kettle of fish in terms of difficulty as well. I thought this would be really simple, but for reasons which will become apparent in a minute or so, it was not. But the concept was to have this sort of low glass barrier for the guests to look into, and then we'd have the water positioned at such a height that the guests can see the platypus sort of from above looking down, and then also from underwater if the guests crouch down to look under the water level. I've seen this done in zoos, not with platypus. I don't think I've ever actually seen a platypus IRL. They're really rare outside of Australia and New Zealand in terms of zoos. And then we just have a little burrow next to the water. And then I discovered that you can't put the burrow enrichment item in within about 5 meters of the nearest water source, or within about 3 meters of the nearest habitat gate, which is a big problem when you've built a habitat as small as this. So mucking around with the barriers, moving the gate around, you can see from the red color that no matter what I try to do, I just cannot get the burrow anywhere within the back wall of the habitat, which is the white plaster there. So I came up with a cunning plan, which was to build a fake burrow inside the habitat and put the actual burrow behind the habitat with null barriers around it, so that the habitat is actually twice the size that it appears to be. And amazingly, somehow I got this to work. It took a lot of doing, but I ended up with a habitat as tiny as I wanted it to be, that is fully functioning. The platypus can dive underwater, the platypus go into a burrow, and you can see the platypus in the burrow on the burrow cam that we're going to link up later. So eventually I got there. That was very pleasing. And having got the mechanics of the habitat working, now we need to make it look good. So I've built a sort of fake burrow entrance out of the rocks here, and I've got a little platypus in here to test it. We're going to see how sort of small we can make this and have them still be able to walk through it on the heat map there. And having made this just with a few rocks and then dug this awful looking hole into the back of the habitat, now we need to do a lot of terrain work to get this to look good and sort of in keeping with the quality of habitat that I like to think that we have in this zoo. So the one issue is when you bring the platypus into the habitat, you have to manually move them over the wall into the habitat itself. but that's fine. I can't put like a ramp in or anything, because in order to get a ramp up and then down, obviously they'd then be able to just climb out of the habitat and get back in again. And later on I'm just going to take a couple of bricks out of that wall at the back and cover it up with foliage so that the keepers can get in and out and refill all the water feeders. So we paint in the inside of the burrow so it looks nice and natural, or at least it will do once I've put enough plants and stuff covering it up. And then we're going to go in with planting. Now you're probably wondering at this point, where have all the trees gone? So like I say, this game is crashing every 10 minutes or so when I'm trying to build this. And I was thinking that maybe one of the potential reasons for this, which is something that Romano Palacios noticed when he was building in the zoo, is that with the completely pointless bald cypress trees that I built back in episode 1, each one of those is made up of, I think, 8 pieces, and I have literally thousands of them covering the entire map in groups of about 4,000 pieces each. So I was thinking maybe I'm just taxing the game too much. The frame rate's fine, but maybe I'm using too much memory or something like that. So I deleted every tree in the zoo, and it made no difference whatsoever. I was still getting crashes all the time. So in the end, I saved this habitat as a blueprint and then brought it back into the file that still had the trees in. So the trees haven't really gone anywhere, don't worry about that. But yeah, that's why it looks really weird. I've also been through loads of different colour schemes with this habitat, and I've ended up going with something really simple, which you'll see in the final result. And yeah, I'm really happy with the habitat itself, especially with how small it is. Having worked with franchise mode for the majority of the time I've been playing Planet Zoo, it's really nice to be able to build a cute little habitat that is the right size for the animals, rather than being at the absolute top end of the recommended size for the animals. So I'm dressing up the sort of riverbank here with a load of roots and some reeds, and then we'll do some work on the underwater part of the habitat, which, as you can see, is a load of one of my favourite pieces, the smallest temple rubble piece, and then some underwater plants as well, just to give it a nice interesting look and get away from the sort of bare terrain that you get by default. And we're going to do a load more rock work above ground as well to get everything looking good and take away from the sort of patch of mud followed by a patch of grass that's in there at the moment. And I'm so happy with how this looks when it's finished. I know I said this last week about the Caiman River, but this might be my favourite habitat in the zoo, and I'd be really interested to know, actually, as I've mentioned numerous times before in this series, I'm really trying to make every build different and try and make each build different from the sort of builds that we would do in Tecton Zoo. Although this one is a little Tectonish, I must admit. I've tried to make it less so, trying to make it really colourful and take away from the sort of white concrete look. But there is definitely a sort of Tecton-y kind of feel to this habitat, less so when it's finished, I think. And that leads me on to my question for this week. What I want to know is, what is your favourite habitat in the wetlands? I'd be really interested to know, with all the different sorts of builds that I've done each week, I want to know, what is your favourite? Which one did you like best? I think that'll be really helpful for me going forward in terms of what kind of things you guys like and what kind of things look best. And speaking of the future, on the Tuesday that the conservation pack is released, there's going to be a new episode of Planet Wild featuring one of the amazing new animals, which I'm really excited about. So please join me for that. I'm going to try and make it the best episode of Planet Wild ever. We'll see how that goes. So here we are now, back in the proper zoo with all the trees. Oh my god, it looks so much better like this. That is the platypus. Next week, we're going to be doing the final habitat in the zoo, the alligator walkthrough. So join me then. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you next week. Bye.